So you, shh. Thank you. Councilmember Wendy Grohl, Chair of Transportation Committee. Mr. Parks is not here today because of his father's funeral, and Mr. Rosendahl's on jury duty, and Mr. Labange scheduled a meeting at the same time as we have, so he's not here, and we're not anticipating Mr. Alarcon. Is that correct? Okay. So you're all stuck with me. My apologies. And what I'd like to do, and well, I guess I'd like to do, and is consent items 1, 2, and 8. And also approve the motion on number 7 and ask for Caltrans to report in 60 days. So seeing no objection, that will be the order. Okay. So those of you that are 1, 2, 7, and 8, you are good to go. Back to work. So if we could go to item number 3, then I want to take item 4, and then I'll give you how I want to go from there. But if we go to item number 3.
Item number 3 is a DOT report relative to the feasibility of extending the hours of Dash Downtown routes on Friday nights.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Phil Aker from the Department of Transportation's Transit Bureau. We put a report together authorizing the use of the city-owned Dash vehicles for a nighttime service in downtown Los Angeles, 2 routes running from about 6:30 at night to about 3 o'clock in the morning. And it would serve the Historic Core, Music Center, and LA Live. And the proposal that we put together was contingent on private sector funding. And so we would make the vehicles available and the contractor to operate the vehicles. We had been working through LA Live, or LA Inc. rather, Convention and Visitors Bureau. They agreed to try to gather the money. We had an email yesterday saying that they've really been unsuccessful, at least at this moment, in gathering funds. So what we had proposed was to move the report, but it would be contingent on future, parallel efforts to raise money to actually operate the service.
Now, one of the reasons we had wanted to do that was to do it in concert with the MTA's extension of their hours during the holiday season. Is MTA still pursuing that?
Yes. Yeah, evidently the money is in hand to operate from November 22nd through New Year's.
Okay. Now, if suddenly tomorrow LA Live or the Music Center or LA Inc. or some other philanthropic business person, whatever, came through with the $34,000, is that what it is?
Yes.
What would be the timeline? Would you still be able to, is there a drop dead date that you would not be able to extend it? If you wanted to do it in concert with
There's no per se
MTA.
drop dead date. Obviously, the sooner we know, the better. We probably would need at least a week's notice. Our contractor, First Transit, is on notice that we want to run the program contingent upon the funding. So we can try to eke it out as long as we can. And that's as Phil suggested, that the report, if we can move the report forward, then we have the authority. If the money comes at the last second, we still have the opportunity to operate the service without having to go back and seek additional approvals.
So this action would allow us to move forward
Yes.
on the approval of that with money hopefully coming forward, but we don't have it yet.
Yes.
But it gives you the authority to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know if we have any representatives from Mr. Wiesar or Ms. Perry's office today. I don't know if you want to, because I don't know how engaged. I mean, I know I haven't necessarily been asked to call specific, and I would have taken direction from LA Inc. about people who were interested in doing this, whether or not there are some things that Ms. Perry, Mr. Wiesar, and myself can do to potentially help raise those funds or donate, look at our own funds or whatever.
Councilwoman, the issue really seems to come down to money. There is political will, there is community interest in seeing this happen, certainly in concert with the extension of the Metro Red Line hours. It would be wonderful to see happen. And I think that DOT's response is probably as good as we can expect under the circumstances. If we can find the money, they only need a week's notice, and we're only the first week of November. We'll all be glad to pull in the same direction. I don't think there's any opposition.
So if you, I mean, I'll talk to Ms. Perry as well, but maybe we can sit down and brainstorm and say, you know, how do we do this?
How do we get from here to there?
Yes, how do we get from here to there? Because $34,000 is not insurmountable.
No. It
and,
could be earmarked as some sort of a pilot program to see if
Yeah.
this will generate enough interest to continue it on a regular basis.
because I'm willing, and hopefully my chief of staff is listening to this too, to put some of my own district money in potentially to help see that this would be possible.
Okay.
So we should talk to be able to do that. So the action will be today that we move it forward with the hope and prayer that we find money to get that $34,000, and that your office and our office and Mr. Wiesar's and maybe others who would like to see this continue. Maybe we can approach Mr. Garcetti's office is listening too, since some of the people might be coming from Hollywood. I could list anyone who's along that.
It also may be an issue that Councilman Reyes may be interested in.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So if they're all listening to this, wait, hold on. No, don't hold on to your wallet. We're coming for it. So let's see what we can do and get some of the private sector as well, but we'll work on it. So thank you. Okay. So that'll be the action. It would be adopt the DOT recommendations. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think if we could go to item number 5, and maybe before we hear that, we have some public comments. So if you'd just outline the item, and then I'll ask.
Item number 5 is DOT reports in response to a Gruhl-Perry motion relative to the proposed taxicab consultant study that will review the city's taxicab regulatory program.
Okay. Melise Adamu, Francine Ocean, David Shapiro. And this must be you, Mr. Sachs. There's no name on it, but your handwriting, it looks like you. If you want to come on up, Mr. Sachs, and then after that we'll have Mr. Rouse will join us as well. So Melise, Francine, David, and Mr. Sachs. Thank you. Mr. Sachs? Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Box, Stephen? Stephen, we passed. Number 7 is reporting back in 60 days. So I don't know if I know you put in a public comment card, but okay. Just want to let you know that. Thank you. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Mellis Adamu from United Independent Taxi. I'm just wanted to recommend some of the things that we saw. The number of taxis which serve City of Los Angeles should be also, the need and necessity should be evaluated at the time of the franchise. Right now we do have over 2,000, but unfortunately in some areas we don't have enough services. So I wanted the study group to see the number of taxis that should be available for the areas that are the City of Los Angeles need and necessity. The other one is some of the studies that we are suggesting shouldn't be one-sided only. It has to have all sides of the studies that we have for the City of Los Angeles. Some of the drivers, since they are owner-operators, independent owner-operators, they don't want to be seen some of the things that they do. So I wanted, from the independence point of view, their independence should be respected as it was before and in the future also. The other thing is the medallion issue should be also discussed on this issue. Yes, they have done it, but it has to be done in a way that it will serve the City of Los Angeles, and at the same time it has to be regulated. So it has to be like hybrid type of the new franchise should be. So I think the company should have the opportunity to be involved on this, not only the staff and all some groups. The company should be involved for this issue. That's what I'm suggesting.
Thank you.
David Shapiro, founder of UITD and leader of the taxi driver owner movement and driver movement, actually, which broke through the yellow cab Teamster monopoly. 7-year president, 20-plus years on the streets. I pointed out to the commissioners that the last study had a board member of the Yellow Cab Rouse operation running the thing, and that Janine, a respectable, and I respect her, staff member of the DOT, as wholly as if she were a staffer part of that. So I worry very much about the biases being in favor of the lobbying interests. I want you to eliminate any restrictions of time, any restrictions of geography on your study. I brought pictures of a Florence woman who's running a great individual owner operation there, who is well known throughout the city. And a study should not stop where biases might occur. I want driver-owner cooperatives of independent driver owners inserted as part of the study. It shocks me that they're not. I want individuals unaffiliated with anyone who want to own their taxis as part of that study. They're not in there. And I want to remind you, Madam Chair, that I, on Tuesday night, was in the Rio Hotel with labor people, with minority people. I had put in hard 4 days working the projects of Las Vegas, and I was stimulated by them and the people in those projects who were so hopeful. And I've said over and over and over again during all the years that I was here, I start with hopes, and then the lobbyists dash my hopes. And in this era, you don't invite me in. I wrote letters to all of you. Who could be more expert than I? Everybody behind me will tell you I am equal to the most expert person about drivers and taxis and have a lot to give. So I hope you would at least make those changes to make me believe that this is going to be something fair. Also, it's premature. We have 2 years to go.
Thank you. Francine and Arnold, and then, excuse me, before we start your time, Ms. Francine, hold on one second. I'm just going to call up also Set and Nayu as well. Go ahead.
Start the time?
Yes. Yes, start the clock back again at 2, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Francine Ocean. I'm representing United Independent Cab, and I would appreciate your considering the following as part of the scope of work. First, the needs assessment, which should be an absolutely fundamental part of this report. We really don't know how many taxis the city needs to serve our seniors, our visitors, and our residents, and this should be a major part of the scope of work. It needs to be determined so that you can see whether bandits have anything to do with it, or we simply just don't have enough cabs regardless. And second, technology neutrality for the emissions reduction, I believe, is essential when we're looking at this. There should be an MPG goal as the best way to do this, but this should be left open as to what technology we have. At this moment in time, we don't know what emerging technologies there are out there. There's so many new and innovative technologies that are being researched for motor vehicles today. One of them I heard about is where you take a 6-cylinder car and you can ramp it down to a 2 or 3-cylinder car, depending on the driving conditions. There are prototypes of that, so that when you look at this, think to what is coming up in the pipeline, and let there be some flexibility for the taxi companies and for the city, both, so that the end result is what you want, which is green technology. You want to reduce your carbon footprint, but you want to look at all the technologies and alternative fuels that are out there. I'm a Sierra Club leader. I'm also on their transportation committee, and I can tell you that at the Sierra Club, we look at all the emerging technologies. We do not support one technology over the other because we know that there's so much coming. And lastly, we would encourage your scope of work to evaluate the medallion system as well as your franchise regulatory system, and look at the ways you might be able to do a hybrid system which incorporates the best of both of these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Arnold Sachs. In some of the information I was looking through, it looked like the report given out by the Taxi Board of Taxi Board. They addressed something in there regarding identification of driver status, but they didn't. I don't know why they didn't mention that the IRS had already made a ruling on that, And why they didn't include a copy of the report, you might want to ask them about that. The IRS, there was supposedly somebody wrote a letter to the IRS, and the IRS ruled that the driver was labeled an employee of the cab company. And it was brought before the attention of the Board of Taxi Board Commissioners, and nothing was ever done with it. So where that stands, I don't know. One of the speakers mentioned owner-operator of the cabs, and in the information also, the transparency. Well, if you have an owner-operator of a cab, the public should have a right to know who owns and who's operating. If they get in a cab, they should have the right to know who's behind the wheel. What's that status? When you go to a McDonald's or you go to a Holiday Inn, if it's a franchise, it'll say a franchise. If it's owned or operated, there'll be a sign that says, this is operated by such and such, or this person owns such and such. And you can find that information. You may have to look for it, but you can certainly find it, and it'll be posted. And finally, there was a story in the newspaper a few weeks ago. They did an interview with some drivers when they were talking about the Hail a Cab program. And one of the drivers they were talking to was talking that he owns his cab, and the cabs can cost between $50,000 and $60,000. And I was looking at that and saying, how could it be so much? The franchise fees that were discussed here are generating like $1.2 million or something. They just want to raise the fees. And then there was a driver's fee that's minimal, $118. So if it's a city seal that's costing between $30,000 and $60,000, first, why the big gap? And second, who's collecting that money, not the city?
Thank you very much. Mr. Rouse?
Yes.
And while, just before you speak, last two speakers, Hamid Akam and Maccabee. Could join us over here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman, and thank you for allowing me the time to speak. I'll be very, very brief. The only, just 2 points. The city needs to keep in mind that the current structure of the taxicab industry is one that is very close to a medallion system already. We have owners who buy into the taxicab, either cooperatives or associations. They essentially buy the right to operate the vehicle within the existing franchise structure. They pay a lot of their life savings in order to buy that right. If there is a transition to medallions, there needs to be an acknowledgement that the bundle of rights that the city has presently granted these people is very close to what would be contemplated under a medallion system for 2 reasons. Number one is we don't want a medallion system that harms the owner-operators of our industry by actually saddling them with a net loss of rights. An example of a bad medallion system in that way would be San Francisco, where our owners can presently transfer their shares, but in San Francisco they can't transfer the medallion. That would be a step in the wrong direction. The other thing is we don't want the city, with respect to the present owners, to be overpricing the medallion, given the fact that they really already have about 90% of that bundle of rights today. It should be, at least for the initial owners of the industry, the driver owners, it should be some pricing based on the incremental benefit of going from the franchise system to the medallion system. The other thing is that the UCLA study has been thoroughly debunked as an unscientific study. Your own department did a very thorough study of what driver earnings are. There are some concerns in the UCLA study that should be addressed. I would not sit here and say that the study should be ignored, but the findings of the study are absolutely unscientific, and they've been debunked. And so we need to keep that study in perspective. But the consultants should look at the entire industry, and we have no problem with this plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Ntayo Sulase. I'm from Los Angeles Taxi Workers Alliance. As is indicated, what I'm suggesting is the accountability and transparency and fairness in this input, and driver input. That's what. And the UCLA study, they only, after 100 pages, the debunk, he said, was only the $8.39. All this time, they tried to hide it behind and cited a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions. Those questions should be answered. And some companies, they sold cabs for 40,000 for poor individuals who've been paying for so many years with interest, and they are not sure if they own or not. So they have to have the right to take their cab to create their own individual company if they want. They shouldn't be clipped with anybody else, and that right should be respected. And also, as is now, the companies are come together and create organization. And instead of individually competing for the drivers, there's no competition among companies now. They are together, and if you have, if you have speak anything, you cannot go anywhere as a driver. And the other one is also lease drivers. If there is any increased tax, it should be given to the lease drivers who've been driving for 40 years, 30 years, and above. So they service this city for a long time. They are experts. And instead of giving any medallion or franchise, to give to those lease drivers so they will have a chance to own, part of the taxi company. And I really emphasize the UCLA study questions should be answered. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Before I start my time, I just have a procedural question. So this document from the Taxi Cab Commission, is that a part of the official document now that the DOT is presenting today, or is that been incorporated in there?
One of my questions too, but I believe so. So we'll make sure to clarify that. But I think their recommendations are going to be included in the ultimate overall.
Okay, so what they talk about the UCLA study and the scope of work. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you, Madam Chair. Hamid Khan with the Los Angeles Taxi Workers Alliance. It's very interesting that the speakers are saying that the existing system is close to Medallion, and that should be recognized. Maybe it is, but if it is, it's closer to New York than San Francisco with the system of predatory financing and exploitation that is going on, where it's just mind-boggling that a taxi medallion should cost $500,000. And how do you get there? And given with the mortgage crisis and given where people have spent all their life holdings, it has become a system pretty much of finance companies and lawyers and accountants to take over. Secondly, again, the same rah-rah-rah about the UCLA study, which is also interesting that it has not been debunked. I mean, in this hideous tradition of litigation and lawsuits, which, by the way, you should know that the taxi companies have come together and sued South Asian Network, myself, and the Taxi Workers Alliance in their effort to silence us. And again, this whole tradition of harassment and trying to. But we're not going to get silenced, so that we just want to be very clear about it. So thank you very much for incorporating the recommendations from the Taxi Cab Commission, because UCLA study still remains to be a seminal work. It's the only national study that has ever been conducted. It's the most comprehensive quantitative and qualitative study that was done. And on top of that, that for DOT to debunk that, the only thing they debunked was, the wages, which when we took those calculations to the Dean of Department of Statistics at UCLA, they called the way the DOT had done its calculations as an equivalent of ecological fallacy. So that goes to show as to how much time was put in. We just want to emphasize that this system should remain transparent. This system should remain open. We also want to emphasize that the DOT should have to go back to the Taxi Cab Commission and Transportation Committee to get approval of the recommended consultant. The RFP, the draft that we saw, is still in a draft stage. We would also insist that that the final draft or the final copy should be vetted by the Commission and the committee itself. So thank you for incorporating the Commission's advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Makul Saifo. I'm an owner operator since 1996 at Yellow Cab Company. And I see a lot of issues here. People, they don't represent us. They are speaking for us. Then we never elect them for us. So it's a drama for me. So this office has to look back to we have a good communication with our companies, different companies, and we are working hard on the street. We believe on these companies. They are our agent, nobody else. 2-3 gangsters, they are coming here and they are saying that they are going to represent us for this franchise. I didn't think so, because the people, we are working on the street hard as the cab drivers. We elect our companies. which company we want to work. That's why since 1996, I stick with Yellow Cab because I like the way they manage the companies. People that are the same like me, there is in United. They like them the way they will be managed. They are working there. But these people are asking to create a human zoo in the city of Los Angeles. I don't know who's going to control it if we let them have these companies to run it. So I urge you, this is a serious issue. Out there, a majority of the people believe on these companies the way we are. The way we are, we go to the medallion. Anybody wants to consult with me, I'm open 7/24 on this issue. We are the workers, not these people that have a good mouth coming here, sitting, talk about for me. Nobody elect them. So you have to take a consideration on this issue.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That closes public comment on that item. Could we have the department, please, to come to the table? And if you could, in your presentation, there were some issues raised by the number of people who spoke regarding needs assessment, independent taxi operators, medallions, hybrids, other kinds of items, if you could address that, as well as is the recommendation from the taxi cab commissioners included in the scope of work for this item as well?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amir Sadati, Assistant General Manager, Los Angeles Department of Transportation. I'm joined here by our Acting Chief and Taxi Cab Administrator, Tom Drischler. As we gave you a brief verbal report last time, and we kept our promise, and we're before you with a written report.
And I just want to, because I know Mr. Shapiro mentioned that why are we rushing when we're, this motion was introduced in March, and the idea is that we do not want to rush things. We want to be able to have the time frame in which to review all of the recommendations, so we are not rushed at the end and have to continue something. So, as I recall, the end of 2010 is when these...
Yes, on January 1 of 2011 is when the taxi franchise ordinances will expire. So as part of what was done in 2000 in preparation of that franchise, the department went and RFP'd for a consultant to provide the necessary review and evaluation for our regulatory practices. So the department at this point is considering the same process here, of course. We're asking for a request for proposal to be released. And what is before you today is the draft scope of work that needs to be incorporated into that RFP. The department presented at the October 16th Board of Taxi Commissioners the scope that's presented in our report that looks at vehicle and driver permitting functions, performance standards, wheelchair accessibility service and standards, driver safety and training, driver health, disability, and workman compensation benefits, vehicle air quality standards, which will look at not only the miles per gallons or local pollution levels, but also technology, levels of insurance coverage, driver, member, and company transparency levels and requirements, describe technology requirements or innovation that may be available, qualifications, experience of the companies, public convenience and necessity, which we'll talk about the actual number and types of taxi cabs that's required or that's needed for the City of Los Angeles. And most importantly, is something that was mentioned in a lot of the public comments, the methodology for setting or regulating whether it's a permit, franchise, medallion, or a hybrid thereof. At the October 16th Board of Taxi Commission meeting, the board asked the department to take the information through the public comments and really come back with looking at some of the issues that were brought up at that board meeting. After the board meeting, the department also received some correspondences from the Taxi Workers Alliances and other public testimony, and we provided that information to the board on October 30th at a special meeting at the Taxi Commission. Based on that board meeting conversation, the board recommended the following four changes to be included in our scope of work. One was the analysis of and the persistence of bandit taxi cabs and how that affects the industry, and also how that would determine the appropriate number of authorized taxi cabs. So as part of that additional meeting, there was some additional clarification because the department and the board has a subcommittee, and we've done a lot of work, as you know, council member, on the bandit taxi issues, working with LAPD. So this wasn't really solving that problem, but really looking at the levels of that problem and how it affects the necessity and the numbers here for Los Angeles. Explicit consideration of models and features of medallion system. As mentioned, it was in our scope of work. However, the board thought that it should be explicitly stated into the scope of work that they really look at the medallion system as a possible option for City of Los Angeles. In addition to the Board of Taxi Commissions asked that the consultant review and discuss the findings and the issues brought up by the Professor Blasi and Levitt of UCLA. The department was going to provide that study as well as all of our work that we've done on it. So there, this in a way memorializes this, that they made sure that we gave that information, all of the information that's been presented, that's been written from their side, from our side, and that's presented to them for their review and discussion. And lastly, what the commission had also asked that the consultant measure and evaluate the perception and satisfaction with the taxi industry in Los Angeles as one of the key measures of their scope of work. Also, what we wanted to put together for you was a tentative timeline. That's on page 5. The department's requesting the release of the consultant RFP in early December of 2008. We hope to have the award of the consultant contract by April of 2009. We will come back and provide the consultant submission and findings and recommendations by August of 2009. There will be plenty of discussions, deliberations, stakeholder meetings, a lot of meetings as was done back in 2000 with the industry, with the drivers, with the commissions, with the council members, and that will happen between August 2009 and April of 2010. And if refranchising is to proceed, if that's the method that is determined by policymakers, then the release of the franchise RFP for taxi operators is anticipated to be released in May of 2010. And submission of taxi cab franchise proposals August of 2010, which takes us into the evaluation process, and we hope to have the completion of new franchise ordinances by October, November of 2010.
And are the items as outlined by the other speakers included as well?
Yes, council member, and truly, if and I don't want to take the time to go one by one, but and if anybody does not have our full report, we'll be happy to provide that report. The necessity, the vehicle quality, the air quality issues, the assessments, the transparency of the companies, all of that is in the scope of work that's being presented. And I'm happy any of the speakers would like to speak to me after this meeting, or they know how to get a hold of me. I'm happy to fully explain that to them also.
Okay. And I know one thing, you want the authority to execute without coming back to us, but I think there's enough of an issue that we'd like that to come back to the committee and commit to a approval within a 30-day period or something like that, so we do not get off timing.
That's the only reason. I know it was such it was a tight deadline for us, so the reason we put it in that fashion was for that reason. But if we're happy to definitely come back to commission and this committee, however, that may add some time, council member.
Well, the hope is, because it shows like a 4-month period between December and April to select with the release of the RFP. So the hope is that you might do that expeditiously and be able to come back to us and meet that. But we'll commit to having it heard as quickly as possible as it's released from you all on the selection. But I think it is important enough, it's a big enough issue that I think there would be some discussion when we move forward. So I know, again, this is all coming as a communication from the chair, but that we'll amend the DOT report I'm looking at the CLE, okay, right? To add that they come back.
We're going to amend the recommendations from DOT's original report to include the issues outlined in the letter that we've received, and then also amend it to have them come back with the recommended consultant.
Correct. And we can even commit that we'll review it within a 30-day period of time. So if we want to add that actually into the language of the report. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I know a lot of you came for that item. Okay, I think we'll go back to, I think the only two items we have left are item 4 and item 6. Is that correct? So
Yes.
item 4?
Item 4 is DOT report relative to the status of the city's efforts on safety loo reauthorization.
Hello. My name is Michael Wenner. I'm with the Department of Transportation. The list that you have before you is a slightly augmented list from the list that appeared in our first report. We've added a few projects that came to our attention. We've added the city's community dash transit fleet replacement buses, and we're hopeful that that will be a competitive project because they're alternative fuel vehicles, and we've been doing that for some time.
Michael, can we step back just for 1 minute,
sure.
and maybe
Sorry.
the mayor's office can come up
Yes.
as well, because we've had some discussions. The whole idea behind this report and the conversations that we've had, and we spoke about it, albeit late in the night, on Measure R, hoping Measure R was passing. We were talking about this. So, my recollection at midnight is correct. The whole idea is for us to be prepared, whether it be safety loo, earmarks, or potentially an economic stimulus. That we don't want to have to go back each time and say, let's create a list. And so the concept behind this was, we're not sure if safety loo is actually going to happen next year with the current economic situation, but we do think that we should have a document, and potentially even an evolving document as we go forward, but that everyone, all council members, mayor's office, everybody, and then be able to express to our congressional members, which I think you may have even had some discussion today with them, their staffs, is to be able to say, hey, here's some that are happening in your district. These are priorities of the city. And so that's really where we're coming from on this item. So as it has, when you have here the proposed list, my biggest item is, one, have we done the outreach we need to do to make sure it is comprehensive? And two, kind of the processes we're going forward and where we begin to insert, so we can educate the rest of my colleagues as well as to how this list is going to be used. And if something they want isn't on it, why is that the case? And are there other opportunities for them? So that was just kind of the overall picture. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about the process and how you got to these items, and how it might fit into the other potential options of a economic stimulus or earmarking that could occur in this next year.
Okay.
And jump in mayor's office too with the department.
I think I think we're in general doing that process. The list that we started with was the list of projects that were left unfunded from the 2007 call for projects. And that was kind of our most recent gathering of projects. But with each kind of call, the requirements are a little bit different, and different enough so that we have to go through that list and refine it, sometimes significantly. And in the case of the safety loo reauthorization and possible economic stimulus projects, the criteria of the two make them such that they're almost mutually exclusive. The economic stimulus package projects need to start construction within the next fiscal year. That's kind of the criterion that they're throwing out right now. In order to do that, a project must be well into design or finished with design in order to start construction next year. And so those projects are almost never going to appear in a list like this, because these projects would be 6 years out to going to construction. And so I think the economic stimulus package may be a little bit of an aberration, because it's not going to come from kind of our ongoing list of projects. It will come from projects that really what happened is the projects that are eligible for that kind of call would be projects that are in construction, in design or construction, and are short funds at this point. And so that made up almost all the projects except a handful. There was one project, I don't know how this happened, but it was designed and funded, but there was no construction dollars. And that's rare. We don't do that very often. And so, but the safety loop projects, the reauthorization projects, fit in more with this kind of notion of our list of projects and then adapting them or filtering them for projects that more closely meet the requirements of the call. And so on this one, some of the requirements are
So
the
let me just say, so the call and the safety loop reauthorization are similar in
Yes.
there? Okay.
Yes.
But the economic stimulus and the earmarks,
Well, the earmarks are the reauthorization that's the part of the reauthorization we're dealing with specifically.
but aren't there other earmarked items, and I hesitate to call them, but the ones that, where congressional members are able to slip in here and there and they want projects, so like I said, I don't really want to
yeah,
call them that.
the biggest pot of earmarks comes with the reauthorization bill.
Right, okay.
And then in addition to that, there are also occasionally earmarks that come along with the appropriations bill. So every time
Right.
there's a budget passed, if there's money for transportation, they use
Right.
that to do some earmarks. That doesn't happen that frequently. I mean, the Rogan bill was one example, but usually most of the transportation dollars are kind of programmed with the authorization bill.
Jim, do you want to add anything?
Jim Clark, Director of Federal Relations for the Mayor. With respect to that, on the earmark, we're talking about the annual appropriations on those. Generally, those are smaller projects. They're limited in the dollar amount to maybe no more than a couple $100,000, and they're usually funds for projects that would be completed within a one-year period of time from the time that they're done. So most of the projects that Michael's talking about are the kinds of projects that would be in the safety reauthorization and would be much larger dollar amounts and would extend over a number of years, a period of time. I can give you my best crystal ball about what we may think is going to happen with economic
Which is today at 5 to 4, so
exactly.
that's as good as that is at 5 to 4.
Yeah, subject to change. The current thinking now is, on the Hill, is that there may be two economic stimulus packages. There may be one bill that would be dealt with during the week after next when Congress comes back into session. And that bill would be for about $150 billion. Apparently, the ranking member, Representative McCreary, on the Ways and Means Committee has signed off on a stimulus bill of $150 billion. Now, it's still required getting the president's approval, and he had indicated before that he was going to veto a bill that was only $60 billion. So that's to be said. But in that $150 billion, there's also the auto industry is having a meeting tomorrow with the leadership, Nancy Pelosi and others, because they want an immediate bailout of about $25 billion. So that would probably come out of the $150 billion. So we might be left with somewhere around $100 to $125 billion, primarily to be used for infrastructure programs. Those kinds of, as Michael was saying, those kinds of projects, though, are going to have to be ready-to-go kinds of projects, which means they would have had to have already gone through a number of steps, and the kinds of things where the money can be obligated within 12 to 18 months and that construction can basically be underway and money being spent by, within a 2-year period of time. So those are different kinds of projects, and we are in the mayor's office trying to put together that list. So, and how we think what will happen is that the money that's provided will be provided to the states on a formula basis. So California will get a certain amount of money, and then we understand that Caltrans or the state will ask for a list of ready-to-go projects, and then we'll will be competing and lobbying on behalf of those. So it is important, the work that we're doing here for you for safety loop projects, but it's also important too that we have ready a list of ready-to-go projects if and when economic stimulus happens. And then they're thinking that the second economic stimulus would occur sometime in the first couple of months of next year. Chairman Oberstar on the Transportation Committee, who wants to do things about bridges and because of the bridge collapse in his district, he'd like to see an infrastructure bill of $800 billion. So we've heard all kinds of figures out there. We don't know, what will actually occur, but we want to be ready with a list of projects.
This is in addition to the $700 billion.
Yeah,
lack of
right,
better term
exactly.
bailout.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. We
We're
just run the printing presses over
Yeah.
time, I guess. is
In
what we do.
comparison, wasn't Safety Lou about 280 billion?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking big numbers.
Yeah, no, it's big numbers. So, in your process, you met with the city council members, and I know we've been talking about having neighbor council participation. If we approve moving this document forward, and there's lots of different projects on here, and again, it's an evolving document because some fall through, some, something that maybe we thought was going to be funded over here might now move over to Safety Lou. What's the best way, from a perspective in the as our lobbyist and others, to be prepared and to be flexible and yet not recreate the wheel every time? Is it approving this draft list, having periodic updates before it actually goes into, submission? And maybe even having this list that we share with neighbor councils that these are some of the priorities. What's the best step on the Safety Lou aspect?
I think there's a good chance that we will have some amount of time before Safety Lou actually passes. Safety Lou took nearly 2 years. It was 2 years after the period should have started, and that was a fairly modest modification of T21, and they're talking about fairly significant changes in this version of the authorization bill. So I expect it's not going to occur too quickly. So I think we ought to be prepared to continually update the list as things change, and things will change. But this is our starting list, I think, and we will continue to tailor it to. We just met with congressional offices, and we heard a lot of different viewpoints. Some congressional offices like to spread it among a lot of smaller projects. At least one congressional office expressed the notion that they were willing to find a single significant project even and spend all their money on that one.
And
so,
didn't we do for the 405 carpool lane? I mean, Berman was able to cajole and convince his colleagues to put a lot of that money into the 405 carpool lane with the understanding that it would be an Oberstar understanding that completion during the Safety Lou period of time.
right. So we have a fairly diverse target, I think, at this point, and we need to focus in on the various congressional offices and our needs, and try and tailor our needs to their desires.
The other point that I'd like to make, I think it's a good idea to have a list because it becomes a point of reference for people to begin a dialogue and a discussion. If we don't have anything at all and it's just kind of floating out there, we really don't have anything. So I think it's good to do that. The other issue, though, that I think we may need to be looking at is some of the programmatic changes that we would like to see in. I mean, Senator Boxer is talking about creating a goods movement fund, talking about are we going to raise the gas tax, or are we going to find other ways through user fees, national container fees,
and we did some. Didn't we did some comments to the box for the Boxer and Post.
So did the mayor, but we
Right.
should be, try to see if we have a position that we ought to be really advocating for in terms of as they're drafting up what's going to be the criteria and the guidelines for that.
Okay. So the action item we should be taking today is approving this list as the starting point, evolving list, and move it forward. I think the suggestion was to move it forward to the Rules Committee to have a little bit of discussion of the position we take. And then maybe have every, 45, kind of a report back based on stuff that's happening. We can figure out if it's 30 or 45 days that says, okay, where are we on the legislative pack? Where are there opportunities if we need to make comments on legislation that may be introduced, and in fact, being ready for the economic stimulus package that is hopefully going to, I think I believe it's important on the infrastructure aspect, as well as we look at Measure R and what we now are going to have some local dollars, which we should look at potentially introducing a motion to ask for, there's a portion of that comes to the city of Los Angeles.
We have an outstanding report. I think the department's going to report back soon on that local funding.
Okay, so our action would be to approve this and
As amended.
As amended. Okay.
Today's list.
May I make another comment?
Yes.
One of the numbers that was floating around was $1.2 billion for California on the economic stimulus package. At the California Transportation Commission, Caltrans announced that they had $1 billion worth of projects that were ready to go within a year. And so while the federal government is dishing out the dollars, there's also a debate up at the state that we need to have in order to make sure that cities and counties get a fair share of that money also.
Yes. And I'm sure you'll keep us, in the League of Cities as a board member or executive board member, it's really important to keep that as well on the top of our list. Okay.
Madam Chair, just for clarification, the list that you're referring to is the list that was submitted by Department of Transportation today?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll have a big discussion in council, and, again, remind all of my colleagues, those who are not here, and others, now's the time to look at this list, to have those discussions, that it is an evolving list, but we encourage them to work within the neighborhood councils and presentations to go forward on this. So, thank you. Next item.
Last item is item 6, which is a CAO and DOT report relative to a proposed contract for the operation of the city's downtown transit services.
Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
Good. The CAO report recommends approval of DOT's request to enter into contract with Veolia Transportation for the operation of downtown dash services for a period of up to 5 years. Funding is available on an annual basis in the Proposition A fund budget, and sufficient funds are available in 2008-2009 for this purpose. DOT is also here to present some additional information.
Jim Lefton with the Department of Transportation. I'm going to ask Corinne Routh, who's the head of the DOT's transit operations, to give a brief summary of the department's report, and then I'll have 2 final points that I'd like to make at the end of that.
Yes, I'm just going to make a very brief review of the recommended proposal. Back in May of 2008, DOT, the Department of Transportation, released an RFP for the continuation of the Dash Downtown services. We sent out 26 RFPs and received 4 in return. 3 of the 4 were existing providers. First Transit, which was the incumbent contractor, MV Transportation, also an existing contractor, Veolia Transportation, an existing contractor, and Southland Transit. We assembled an evaluation panel consisting of members from LA DOT, the City of Glendale, and MTA. The evaluation panel evaluated the proposals and set up interviews with the staff from the various proposers. The evaluation panel determined that the best proposal, the most cost-effective, thorough response was received from Veolia. Even though they were not the lowest bid, they were approximately $2.3 million higher than the lowest bid, which is from Southland. But because of the strength of the proposal, their attention to detail in terms of the operating methodology, their focus on some of our concerns concerning vehicle bunching and on-time performance in the downtown area, all these issues have been addressed thoroughly by Veolia. First Transit and MV are also existing contractors, as I mentioned earlier. Their proposals are also strong. They also provide transportation services on behalf of the department already. But there were some concerns about their cost being higher than not only Veolia, but the lowest provider. And the fact that their facilities were located at some distance away from the city, which meant that there were going to be more wear and tear on their vehicles, higher costs for fuel, etc. The lowest proposer was Southland Transportation. However, the evaluation panel did not score them as highly because there were some concerns about the fact that their previous experience was limited to power transit and had very little experience operating service of the size and complexity of the Dash downtown. There were also concerns of the fact that they did not have a facility identified at the time of their submitting of the proposal. They did indicate that they were going to select a facility prior to the award of the contract. There was also some concerns about the labor wages. The wages were significantly lower than the other three, which were all competitive, all very in line with the current contract that First Transit had with the Teamsters Union. So because of the lower wages and because of the facility that was not identified, the fact that they were not experienced as a provider for the type of service that is operated in the downtown area, the evaluation panel felt it was a better choice, a most cost-effective choice to recommend Veolia Transportation as the select contractor for the downtown Dash services.
I'd like to add a couple of quick points. One, you should have before you a supplemental report prepared by the department dated October 30th that provides some information on traffic or bus operating safety statistics, accident data for our three existing contractors. There's a table in that report on page 2 that summarizes the accident data over the last 3 fiscal years, and basically the performance of the 3 contractors is comparable to each other and is well below the national average of 0.71 per 100,000 miles operated. We provided that just for your information. The department is obviously very concerned about providing both reliable and safe transportation services, and our RFPs and contracts provide broad discussion and requirements concerning safety, including detailed driver background checks and permitting, driver training, drug and alcohol testing, mechanic certifications, field supervision, vehicle maintenance standards, and homeland security. So we provide that just for your information. And finally, not contained in the department's report for the contract award, the department is also recommending a month-to-month extension with the existing contractor, First Transit, for a period not to exceed 3 months, effective January 1st, 2009. We make this recommendation to help ensure a seamless transition from the current contract to the new contractor and to minimize any adverse impacts on the riders. The recommended contract rate is $69.26 per hour. That's only about 2.4% higher than the proposed contract rate from Veolia. The net increase in cost to the city would only be about $23,000 per month, or if we go the full 3 months, about $69,000. So that's another recommendation that we'd like to have the council consider.
Okay. And the RFP required that the selected contractor also offer employment to affected employees of the incumbent operator.
Yes.
Okay. And it's a 3-year contract with 2 additional 1-year options to renew. Does that come to the council for that renewal, or is it a department?
Council.
Council. Okay. All right. I think you've answered all my questions. Seeing no questions from my colleagues, I will move this forward.
I could have a few.
Yeah. We'll move this forward. I'm sure there may be some questions in council, but from some of my colleagues, but I have read the documents and just saw the safety document as well. So we'll move this forward as a communication. Okay.
As amended with the month-to-month
yes.
extension.
Thank you.
With the 3-month, yes. Thank you. We do have 3 public comment cards, just general public comment. Arnold Sachs, Stephen Box, and Mr. Shapiro, if you'd all like to come to the table. Mr. Sachs?
Yes. Good afternoon.
Good
Arnold
afternoon.
Sachs. Very quickly, at the October 8th meeting, one of your items on your Transportation Committee regarded spending $750,000 for a Mass Transit-oriented development district station area plans for the proposed LAX Green Line extension. And this was on Wednesday, October 8th. On, I believe it was 2 weeks, a week and later, at the South Bay Regional Council of Governance, we were given, those people in attendance were given a little proposal of the Green Line extension as it would run through the airport, including the People Mover and the Ground Transportation Center. So looking at this diagram, there's a station at Aviation and the Green Line station that exists. There's a Green Line station planned for Aviation and Century right by the Ground Transportation Center. There's another Green Line station, it looks like at Century and like a block east of the airport proper. And then there's another Green Line station, it looks like on Sepulveda and Westchester Parkway. So my question would be, of those 4 stations, where would you plan a transit-oriented project? You can't have it at 3 of them, or you can't, I mean, you could have one either at the Aviation Station or the Westchester Station would be the only 2 plausible places. The other 2 are in the flight path. And the 2 that are left are so close to the airport, I don't know if they're feasible to have transit-oriented facilities. I mean, you know, where would this?
I would suggest you talk to Councilmember Rosendahl where those areas are, because that would come from the direction of that. Mr. Shapiro.
You can be sure I will.
Speaking under the same auspices, I want to incorporate by reference into number 5 my own study that I gave to the DOT Commission, and then I went around to 13 of 15 council offices, and I can't remember, I definitely didn't have enough copies, whether I gave you one or not, but I asked in the writings of each that they incorporate that and study that. It made very hard-hitting, factually based, in my opinion, points. I talked to the assistant general manager outside as to why my report was not included. And he said that the limitations are in our report. I said, show me the language. He couldn't. He did say, you got it in on the afternoon of the 30th. The hearing was, on the afternoon, the day before the hearing, we got notices from the secretary that they had distributed them all around to the commissioners. 2 of the commissioners said they had read it. The chair wasn't sure. It was never mentioned. And the city attorney was absent the 2 meetings of the DOT Commission. And therefore, forgive me for thinking that what I have stood for all these years, because I'm never invited into the meetings, mayor's office, your own auspices, is going to be obliterated, and it's horrible that would be the case. It's of detriment to y'all, because I only mean well. I represent, in most drivers' minds, something from them, and I only try to do my best. But I wish you'd do that in corporation. And just one last point. You said March you issued this thing, but the only time I found out about it was at the commission, not earlier than the 16th.
What we did was ask them to come back with a report and look at the study. This is a, as you kind of indicated, it's a 1.5 year kind of proposal. There's going to be lots of opportunities for input, participation. Really, this item that's before us is just to go out in the RFP and the scope of work. I'll ask the department to review your document and see if there's anything in there that is not included that we may want as it goes to council to see if there's anything else. But this is for general public comment, but we'll ask them to review your document as well.
Well, I'll send it again to Ms. Cohen and yourself.
Great.
And
thank you. Thank you for coming I appreciate it, and we do value your input, and so I appreciate that. Mr. Box.
Good afternoon. I came a long way to this particular special meeting and rearranged my schedule to get here, only to find that the committee didn't show up and that the last item which I came to speak on went first. So I'll go ahead and speak during public comment on a completely unrelated topic. Since I came this far, I might as well take up some more of your time.
No, and we're going to have them come back in 60 days with the report, so we'll.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But now that I'm here, the Department of Water and Power, in its infinite benevolence, is putting on a Festival of Lights as a gift to the City of Los Angeles. They just announced 2 days ago that the Department of Transportation is one of the sponsors of this event. This has been a great year for cyclists. We've had many bicycle issues on the agenda here in the Transportation Committee. And it's unfortunate, though, that the Festival of Lights, as sponsored by the DWP and now the DOT, is open to the citizens, residents of Los Angeles, except those that arrive by bicycle. The metro stops running at 6 o'clock, so you can't get to the Festival of Lights using the metro unless you arrive at 5 and leave by 6. You can walk in, although it's a little tough because it's 2 one-way streets and you'd be walking with traffic rather than against traffic, but that, nevertheless, is not a very popular option. As far as I'm concerned, it's a very popular option to ride my bike. Unfortunately, we're prohibited with the exception of the one day of the year that cyclists are allowed to enjoy the Festival of Lights, which is November 25th, which is when I celebrate the holiday festivities with my loved ones. I say sarcastically. We're banned then for the following 5 weeks. Keep in mind you can take a dog sled. There's actually special provisions made for dogs. You can go by horse. There's special provisions made for for the equestrians, all of whom are my good friends. It's just that I won't be able to enjoy the Festival of Lights with my good friends unless, of course, I get a car.
And I was unaware of that, and I will check on that because it seems...
That's also a violation of state law. What's that?
Be able to walk.
You can walk
or ride
you
your
have to drive there. No, you can't get to the far side unless you go around, which would be on Cahuenga. They're missing 34 street lights on Cahuenga. In other words...
Well, let me commit to this. I'm going to talk to the Department of Water and Power about allowing bicyclists. It doesn't really seem that we should discriminate against bicyclists. I don't know their reasoning, but I will ask them. And I'm not sure, and I will talk to Ms. Robinson, who is sitting here, about DOT funds sponsoring the Festival of Lights. That is not... I never knew that. No, I'm talking about the contribution. Did we give a contribution to DBP for the Festival of Lights? In kind. So DOT staff who will direct traffic. Okay. Okay.
Well, this one doesn't have a permit. It's not even an official event, which is the curious thing also. Even Caltrans kicks in, not because they want to, but because the freeway shuts down and they're involuntarily on to traffic control issues.
Right. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for coming down, Stephen. I appreciate it. This meeting is adjourned.